So I was watching two really interesting videos by a channel called the Kavernacle, whose link I'll put in the description. He did two really good videos examining the career trajectory of Russell Brand on YouTube. Now, pointedly, the Cav was pointing out was that Russell Brand, although he's famous for being a comedian, he's famous for being, I think it was BBC radio DJ, like when Saxgate happened, he's been all over the shop. But he's actually had a YouTube channel since 2014. He's a long-time YouTuber. He's not somebody who just got into the YouTube ecosystem just now. He's always been there, making videos in the background, but he's incredibly spiraled in popularity over the past kind of 2 to 3 years or so. And that has happened when, in an overall shift in tone from a very kind of left-wing, anti-authoritarian kind of point of view, as kind of like a pseudo-anarchist. He called himself a Bucks Fizz anarchist at one point, which is where he's pointed critiques of capitalism and mass media manipulation to support capitalism at the start of his YouTube career, which is then this chain, that kind of tone persisted for a very long time, support for Palestine, and then in the past 3 years, this popularity has skyrocketed. That's moved to a more kind of populist, not right-wing, not left-wing, but secretly kind of right-wing point of view on a lot of issues with regards to the content that he's putting out. And an abandonment of his anti-capitalist, his explicit anti-capitalist sentiments, and also his abandonment of support of Palestine. Now, why do you think this has happened? Well, Kavernacle, in his video, explains pretty well, which you should definitely go and watch it, both of them actually, that this change in political shift has come along with a move into the podcaster grift space, essentially, where he is now taking on the role of getting people like Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson on, and all of these kind of right-wing talking heads that kind of go through this podcast circuit, just kind of washing and rewashing and laundering the same opinions over and over and over again on all of these different social media channels to try and cultivate an audience. Which basically what happens to a lot of people. It's what Jimmy Dawes realised he can do very easily, who's also a guest on Russell Brand, wouldn't you know, by instead of talking about economic issues from a pragmatic policy perspective, or talking about it from an explicit Marxist anti-capitalist perspective, which he previously has done, like Russell Brand has talked about Marx and Weber and people like that on his channel already, previously in the past when he was a smaller channel, but as his popularity has skyrocketed, his opinions have shifted somewhat to kind of mirror the popular discourses of the day with regards to what's popular on these social media sites. Kavernacle kind of wants to purport that what this means is that he is now grifting because he wants to have a career as a YouTuber, rather than because he feels like he wants to do it for some kind of monetary perspective. I don't think he thinks that, which is interesting that Kavernacle had that perspective. But even so, there's been some good points in which Russell Brand's left-wing policies have come through. We don't get that in the majority of their content, and now what he's covering is these cultural, popular issues that galvanize people on social media sites rather than any kind of biting systemic critique of what's going on. Like, he'll talk about Fauci, he'll talk about the trucker protests, or just a bunch of nonsense culture war issues that don't actually have any real bearing on changing systemically what is hurting the working class, which he claims has claimed plenty of times that he actually genuinely cares about. And in a video that he had called "So I'm Right Wing Now," he talks about a bunch of kind of left wing positions that he did have, which a lot of these I agree with, but then he never expands on these in any of his videos and just allows people like Tim Pool and Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson to just say their ideas out completely verbatim without any kind of challenging from Russell Brand's end, despite Russell Brand purporting to completely disagree with these pundits. Now, I wanted to have a look into some of his content and figure out the way in which this is now being, how these points of view are now being laundered in the videos that he's putting out, and the way in which he talks about issues moving forward. Now, I found it an interesting video. I've not watched it yet. There's going to be a fresh reaction that I think could let us see into the way in which some level of anti-capitalist sentiment can be brought into a right-wing perspective by a video that he has done about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. So for people who don't know, the World Economic Forum, they meet in Davos I believe it's every year, and it's just essentially a meeting of some of the richest people in the world, or the people who have vested interests in the continuing prosperity of corporations within the economic system, using this as a kind of brand marketing strategy to try and look like they care about the problems of the world. So there's a really good video by Tom Nicholas called Johnny Harris, A Story of YouTube Propaganda, where people from the World Economic Forum have been paying YouTubers to try and promote their propaganda about a shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, which is essentially no real difference into the way in which capitalism functions, because they recognise that there are some poor consequences of unregulated capitalism moving to where it is. And they have a thing called a Great Reset, which is essentially trying to reset the economy back to pre-neoliberalism, I guess, without changing the structure of neoliberalism, as if that's going to fix the majority of the overwhelming kind of cataclysmic issues that have been caused through capitalism, such as climate change and mass inequality and the destruction of the global south and child labour within these nations as well. They recognise all these problems exist, and they're using Davros as a marketing tool to try and make people think that it's not a problem with capitalism. Now, a bunch of right-wing grifters have latched onto this, and they somehow haven't noticed. They hate the Great Reset and they hate members of the World Economic Forum because they don't think that corporations are capitalist, which is obviously a really stupid argument. They think that corporate hegemony, because it somehow has at least some ties to what the government thing can do, means that it's somehow communism, because they understand what any of these fucking words mean. And they think that it is antithetical to capitalism, that corporations have so much power, and that is the tendency of free markets, and has been from the dawn of time, that these things tend towards monopoly. And it seems very odd that they wouldn't expect that in a free market capitalist economy, the corporations would want to come together to protect their own interests overall, and then be able to eliminate some level of market fluctuations and market uncertainty that leads with having some kind of free market factor overall. In that the free market leads to a monopoly power of a few, or an oligopolic power of a few centralized capitalist organizations, as you see with places like Amazon. And then that leads to them being able to control the economy for their own ends. And Davros is what they would use as a marketing tool to make you think that that's not happening. And the right-wingers are so completely allergic to any kind of critique of political economy. They can't even see that that's what's happening. They just think that these are the bad capitalists. Whereas if we've just had only good capitalists, somehow the system would function. But these people at the top in the World Economic Forum, these people are in the position that they're in because of incentive structures. They're not just a cabal of evil people, they're just people trying to protect their own interests, because at the end of the day, the only interests of capitalism is profit. So Russell Brand's done a video about these people. Now, if he's looking at it from a right-wing perspective, then he'll talk about these people as just being a cabal of people controlling the world with their own ends. If he's looking at it from a left-wing perspective, he will understand that these people are just symptomatic of the overall notion of what happens when capitalism expands and power gets concentrated in fewer hands within that incentive structure, within those modalities, right? So we'll watch the video and we will see his reaction, and then we can judge for ourselves whether we think that he is coming at it from a genuine perspective that he used to hold, or whether the grifting really has taken hold of the way in which that he talks about issues that are part of the kind of the right-wing podcast grift buzzwords at the moment. So we shall see. Let's have a look.
The WEF, Davos, the Great Reset. That's all just the WEF, Davos, the Great Reset. That's all just a conspiracy theory, right? Well, then how come all their ideas...
So you can see a vaccine, passports, and digital ID as the hashtags in the video. You can already see the kind of audience he's trying to cultivate here. He's not saying anti-capitalism. He's not saying anything to do with socialism or the understanding those power structures and those incentive structures. Already he's trying to tie in a right-wing audience who disagrees with any kind of hegemonic power structure, right? They want everything to be completely marketized, not realizing that it's this marketization that's led the World Economic Forum to exist in the first place.
Ideas like digital ID and all of their young proteges like Justin Trudeau keep ending up in government.
I wonder if Justin Trudeau is in power because he's a liberal capitalist. I wonder whether that's what's happening. It's not like some kind of grand conspiracy when he's a man who explicitly supports capitalism and doesn't support any kind of huge level of corporate regulation that would lead to the reduction of profits for the members of the World Economic Forum. I wonder.
Hello there, you 5 million sweet wonders, you awakening souls. Don't let it get you down. I know sometimes you feel fear and anxiety, but you are growing stronger and more powerful, and together we can change the world. And actually, we're going to have to, because the WEF have got some fantastic ideas about how to do it. They come up with suggestions like digital ID. We're going to learn more about that in a minute. I want to let you know that I'm on tour at the moment. You can come and see me in March in Scarborough, in Newcastle, in Carlisle. There's a link in the description for tickets. Bristol, I'm all over the country. Get into that link, come see me live. These shows are crazy. I'm only just learning how to talk again after all the cuddling, hollering, and mayhem that's been at the Manchester shows. There's a link in the description. Come see me. Now, let's look at how the world is truly run. Or not, it could be a conspiracy, but when you see Klaus Schwab, we've done a great video about Klaus Schwab before, you will own nothing and you will be happy, which sounds like a conspiratorial idea, doesn't it? Oh, that's just a conspiracy, you're a conspiracy nut. Then you find out that financial partnerships and hedge funds and stuff are purchasing homes that would usually have been low to middle income American homes in suburbia, and now you can't buy those homes. So it's sort of like you will own nothing, but I don't be happy. Let's see what they have to say about their...
Well, the you will own nothing and be happy was not an explicit comment by anyone who's driving a policy at the World Economic Forum. That was just a throwaway comment by a Danish politician. Although Russell is correct that overall corporate monopolies are buying up housing with which to be able to rent back to people to maintain the assets and drive up the revenue stream that's coming for those corporations, right? Absolutely, that's definitely happening. But you know what's to blame for that? The marketisation of housing in the first place, the reduction in social housing. I wonder if you actually mentioned that in this video. I guess we're going to have to watch another video to elucidate further on these points, right? But that's the root cause of this issue is the marketisation of housing. It is the allowance with which we have treated housing as a commodity, to be bought and sold and to be used as an asset to generate additional wealth, rather than its use value, which is for people to use to live in, which either you can do by making sure that the use of housing as an asset is limited through some kind of regulatory government policy, or by decommodifying it completely and putting in the entire control of housing in the state. I don't agree with the second of those comments. What I do agree with is a hugely strong social housing sector to be able to undercut the ability of landlords to be able to extract rent, the rent controls with which to cap how much people can charge rent, and eventually I would probably look at some kind of policy that was to restrict the max amount of property that people can own at one time. The main reason I advocate for things like this is because as a commodity with inelastic supply and demand, where everyone needs a house, you can't not have a house, so the demand is always going to be tied to the amount of people there are, because everyone needs at least one. And the supply issue is constrained and elastic because building new houses takes a lot of time, a lot of investment, and a lot of will that isn't necessarily always there. So there's always going to be some level of inelasticity to the housing market, which means that it is rife with people who are allowed to profiteer off the commodification of the market by weaponizing the level to which by weaponizing the extent to which that particular market is inelastic. You see the same with healthcare, especially in the United States, where because if you don't get your cancer treatment, you will die, they can charge you whatever you want. And so monopolization is incredibly easy in those markets. I mean, there are plenty of better videos that you can watch, which I won't go into here, that explain why marketization of housing leads to these things overall. But to blame this on the World Economic Forum and not just capitalism working as capitalism, again, just speaks to Russell Brand's not really looking at things through his previous perspective and looking at through this right-wing, podcast grifter brain mindset of things are bad because the wrong people are in charge rather than because the system is broken.
Young WEF youth programme that seems to produce an uncanny number of leaders before getting onto the proposals for digital ID. And we'll ask, are we moving towards social credit in a crazy China Black Mirror way?
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinets.
I don't think I like the sound of that. We penetrate the cabinets.
So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Well, what a coincidence. That certainly puts to bed all those ideas that Davos and the WEF are part of a global conspiracy where powerful people come together and discuss ideas and then collaborate in how to inculcate those ideas and instantiate them without democratic process. I mean, the idea that they've all been...
I mean, there is democratic process. All of these people they talk about are elected leaders. What you should be talking about is why they're in positions of power within these political platforms in the first place. And the reason they're in power, if you'd read some fucking Gramsci, or you'd read some fucking Herman or some Chomsky, is that you'd understand the reason why that they're in power is because these institutions exist to perpetuate the ideas of capital, right? Capitalist institutions will like to perpetuate this particular ideology or this particular economic structure that has put them into the position of power and the position of influence that they're currently in. This idea of cultural hegemony of capitalism, where these things always will look to replicate the system that's put them in the position that they're in at the first place, and why it helps co-opt and helps recuperate ideas that then challenge that hegemony in the first place. And so these people aren't being inserted by members of the World Economic Forum collaborating with anti-democratic processes, but they're put into positions of power through lobbying, through media apparatuses, through all of these things that are happening, with which to make sure that the democratic process acts within the purview of capitalism. That's what it's happening. The reason why Trudeau is in the power that he's in the Liberal Party is because of funding, because of lobbying, because of donations from people who have ties to people with power in the capitalist class, specifically to try and replicate the conditions that lead to capitalist institutions being in power in the first place, which is, of course, capitalism, right? Whereas you look at somebody like Jeremy Corbyn, who is in the Labour Party, which is funded by unions, and he was put there through votes of people who have also come up through the unions, which are there to specifically represent working people. He is only there to, he was only in power in the Labour Party with which to agitate on behalf of power for the working people, to agitate on power against capital, because he's not funded by capital. And why, when he was leader of the Labour Party, the media apparatus tried to essentially character assassinate him and try and cripple his campaign, because they knew that a Labour government under Jeremy Corbyn would have negatively impacted their profits, which again is built into the incentive structure of the profit motive and the ever-turning wheels of capitalism that leads to these positions happening in the first place. Again, people are too busy looking and thinking, where's the evil person? Where's the bad person who's ruining the good system? Rather than looking at the system that incentivizes people to act in bad ways. That's the problem that I have. It's Harry Potter politics. There are no good and bad things, good and bad people. There's no good and bad actions, there's no good and bad systems. There are only good and bad people and good and bad teams, right? Whereas you actually have to look at the incentive structure that push people to act in a certain way, rather than thinking that somebody is just an evil global conspiracy. Which again, Russell Brand would know, if he was actually acting in his previous leftist principles, that's what's happening here. But he's not. He's just talking about there being a global conspiracy where the bad capitalists are in charge. Because he's not thinking about this critically, or he's specifically grifting in such a way that he can cultivate the right-wing audience that is so popular on YouTube, and why people like Stephen Crowder have so many, Jimmy Dore and Tim Pool have so many views.
Meeting up in secret and making deals is certainly quashed when you see Klaus Schwab, the founder, saying, well, I was very surprised that nearly everybody that had penetrated that cabinet had previously penetrated the WEF.
Yeah, Oscar, you're absolutely fucking right. If they were a global conspiracy cabal secretively trying to control the world, why are they televising their fucking meetings? Why are they broadcasting all of their internal thoughts, right? That seems like a pretty poor, powerful global conspiracy to me.
Don't be childish about the word penetration. We're not interested in that sort of thing.
And that's true in Argentina, too. Wow.
Sort your mic out. I'm not going to let you run the bloody world. Can't even run a microphone.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now. I'm with the president.
Oh, okay. So you're just running France and Canada and Argentina. Don't worry, though. Don't be a conspiracy.
The running implies that they're deliberately making decisions for them, rather than incentivizing specific policy platforms to happen because it is in the interests of capital, which is what the World Economic Forum exists to lobby for, not for the cabal, for capital.
Theorist. Okay, so now we've shown that they're very good at getting this.
Again, because people want to blame individuals. They want to be a person to blame. They want to be able to have an easy solution, which is just get rid of the bad people rather than changing the whole system.
Not stooges, professional politicians into positions of power. Now let's see what policies and ideas they have. The World Economic Forum, an international organisation that works to shape global, regional and industry agendas. They're so good with language, aren't they? We're just shaping the agenda. What shape is it? One that can penetrate easily. We penetrate Canada. We've penetrated...
No, the agenda is just pro-capitalism.
Red France, we penetrate Argentina, given half a chance. They published recently their latest proposal, a far-reaching digital ID system that will collect as much data as possible on individuals, then use this data to determine their level of access to various services. Oh, that's not terrifying. That's not literally science fiction. This digital ID proposal is outlined in a report titled Advancing Digital Agency, the Power of Data Intermediary.
Source: Reclaim the Net, World Economic Forum. Let me check out the veracity of this claims. World Economic Forum. For digital ID, reclaim the net. What's this called? Pushes to determine access to services. Exactly. I mean, yeah, exactly. It's very easy to blame people rather than blame a system. Though one of my more kind of heartbreaking examples of this, there was a kid who died in hospital in the UK, who died of sepsis, essentially because there was a nurse who was looking after her and they made some poor decisions. There was poor information in the NHS system, and this kid was given incorrect guidance about do not resuscitate orders and about what treatment they should get because of some essentially latent issues in the archaic system that the NHS uses to be able to transfer data, and also some lapses in care that were essentially a product of the fact that the NHS is understaffed and underfunded, and everybody's underpaid and overworked and overstressed, right? And a couple of easy mistakes to make were made, and this led to this kid dying. And the parents of this kid just wanted the nurse who they thought was to blame for this to go to prison. That's all they cared about. Whereas these people are fucking Tory voters. I'm like, if you're a Tory voter, then the blame lies with the government that you voted in that keeps starving this particular institution of money. And that's why your kid is dead. This nurse would have not been in the position with which to make easy mistakes if they weren't trying to cover an entire shift with no clinician that's above them in charge to, I think was what's the name? Something O'Riordan, I forget the name of the nurse as well. It's a really interesting story, a heartbreaking story that I would definitely encourage people to read. If I find the story, I'll put the link in the description. But essentially, they just wanted to, as long as somebody went into prison because of their child dying, they felt that due justice had been done. But unless you fix the issues with the NHS, the issues with overworking, and the issues with the system, that's going to keep happening. How many nurses do you have to put in jail before they get a new IT system in the NHS, or they hire enough staff to be able to make sure that nurses aren't overworked and so stressed that they miss very small details that then have big ramifications moving on, right? But these people, again, this is a very liberal understanding, unfortunately. It's from 2018. I was already using the individual liberty kind of dog whistle, which is a shame because I think individual liberty is a really important point of view, a really important thing to protect. But most people are using it with regards to, economic activity rather than personal autonomy, which is sad. This does look. I mean, to be fair, this from what's being reported here, this does look pretty ghoulish by essentially data harvesting people online, which I absolutely disagree with, Cambridge Analytica style, with which to decide how and when they should interact economically. But again, the reason why they're doing this is to make capital is to facilitate smoothness of the functioning of capital, and to be able to be able to delineate between consumer demographics. Again, what would they gain from just cutting off individual groups of people? That you've not shown me what they're gaining from this. Which is the issue that I have, is what's incentivizing them to make these decisions. They can't just be evil people because, they're just people who have to lobby on behalf of capital, right? And if you're tired of censorship and cancel culture, then subscribe to Reclaim the Net. Well, I'm sure this is an incredibly unbiased news source. Are they going to link to the original thing? New ambient data collection methods may bring many benefits, but they have the potential to amplify mistrust between people and technology. In this Insight report, World Economic Task Force on Data Intermediaries explores the potential to outsource human decision points of an agent acting on individuals' behalf in the form of a data intermediary. The opportunities and risks of such an enterprise are explored, representing one of the many policy anchors through and around which individuals may navigate data ecosystem models. Fucking hell. Well, I don't have to go too far into this, but this does, if this is true, if what's being reported on is being reported accurately, which I'll have to dig into because I haven't after reading this whole fucking PDF, then this is dangerous, right?
Sometimes they use soft, fluffy language that sort of just seems nice and gentle, and other times it's bureaucratic, technocratic language that's so sort of boring you can't be bothered to think about what it actually means. But I'll tell you what it means. Having so much data on you that they can assess you and reduce you to that data, and then using that data to determine what you can have access to. Now, if you think about a story we've done recently about Canada and the bank account freezing gear, which had happened before over, in America with the WikiLeaks situation, they've got information on you, they've got the ability to freeze your bank account. Does that sound like a lovely little rosy future? I mean, how nice a haircuts some of these tyrants going to have for you to keep believing that everything's okay? And built upon a digital ID framework that the WF has published previously. Under this framework, the WEF proposes collecting data from many aspects of people's everyday lives through their devices, telecommunications networks, and third-party service providers. The World Economic Forum suggests that this data collection dragnet would allow a digital ID to scoop up data on people's online behaviour, purchase history, network usage, credit history, biometrics, names, national identities, medical history, travel history, social accounts, e-government accounts, bank accounts, energy usage, health stats, education, and more. But other than that, privacy, well, I don't like to pry. I only penetrate a little bit, just the tip. Once the digital ID has access to this huge, highly personal data set, the World Economic Forum proposes using it to decide whether users are allowed to own and use devices, open bank accounts, carry out online financial transactions.
Interesting what they've put in quotes here and what they haven't put in quotes. Again, I have to read. I'm gonna have to read this PDF and then tack on an additional part to this fucking segment. But hey ho, such is the life of a content creator.
Business transactions, access insurance treatment, book trips. I think I'll just book a trip. You've not been penetrating any trips, my boy. Go through border controls between countries or regions, access third-party services that rely on social media logins, file taxes, vote and collect benefits. Yeah, but other than that, I'll be private. Oh, yes, I don't like to pry. In this advancing digital agency, the Power of Data Intermediaries report, the World Economic Forum positions this digital ID framework as the part of the solution to a trust gap in data sharing, and notes that vaccine passports, which were mandated across the world during the COVID-19 pandemic, do by nature serve as a form of digital identity.
It's frustrating that, again, people will put the source as being the news article that is then framing the document in question, right? So Tim Pool does this a lot as well, where he'll take a study that is being reported on by a partisan news provider and then quoting the news provider in the segment that he's doing, rather than quoting the study or quoting the piece of information that is then being editorialized by that particular news organization. So that's why I'm going to have to go back and read this fucking report afterwards so I can understand whether or not this is being reported on faithfully by Reclaim the Net. But again, if what they're doing is reporting on unfaithfully, this is legitimately scary. But again, you have to talk about why these things are being implemented, not the fact that they are being implemented, right?
Oh, wow. Do you remember that some people were saying these vaccine passports, even though what you're being told is it's for medical reasons to help prevent the spread of a virus and to save lives, which anyone would agree is a good idea, the concern might be that it...
Well, no, nobody's saying that. Lots of people are saying that it's a bad idea at face value. People are saying no to vaccine passports because they dislike the idea of vaccine passports, not because they think that it's some part of some global conspiracy to control them, although there are certainly a subset of people who do definitely think like that, which gets exacerbated by videos like this that serve to feed into this conspiracy narrative. But again, which I would have to read the PDF to be able to understand.
It becomes a template for future measures that enable centralised technocratic institutions to exploit and control you.
No, but that's being proposed by the government. That the vaccine passport's being controlled by the governments, not by individual tech institutions.
The World Economic Forum also praises the way vaccine passports have allowed governments to harvest data from their populations without notice and consent. Do you know what I really like?
That's been happening forever. We've always had some of our data harvested without our consent. That's been happening since time immemorial. That's what happens when you have, an internet where there's essentially no rules.
Where you harvested that data without notice or even consent, you were able to penetrate almost entirely. I'd ask how you did it, but I don't apply. At a collective level, vaccine data is an incredible public health asset. The United Kingdom government in particular has acknowledged this and has suggested that anonymisation, pseudonymisation and data shielding techniques could be harnessed in a controlled environment to allow for the reuse of that highly sensitive data. We did a video about that. What that meant was that the government was selling data harvested under the pretext of health measures, and we've got to do this vaccine.
Okay, I'm gonna have to fact check another news organization. What the fuck is this? You're not even... No, open access government. Okay, that's the fucking website. Jesus Christ. Just show us the report. Stop showing us editorializations. Listen, the vaccine passport are there to track and control me by collecting my data. I know because I saw it on a YouTube video I watched on my smartphone. True. What's the fucking title of this? Sell NHS patient data. The UK government will permanently transfer all NHS patient data to a database tomorrow, which can then be sold to third parties. Today's the last chance for people to opt out. Well, the fact that it's opt out rather than opt in is bad, but... The NHS app in essence is a vaccine passport with having a barcode that can be scanned. Yeah, exactly. Like we already have the infrastructure in place to implement vaccine passports, and the idea that that would be some kind of model that they can use to then capture further digital ID to be able to use it to be able to control what you can and can't do. That's not borne out with what we have already. The NHS app doesn't contain any of your information other than what information the NHS has on you already, which they need to be able to function as your national health service, right? According to reporting by PA Media, again, more editorializing, just get us the fucking report. And there's just a link to another report on their website. You're not showing me any evidence of this. Let me just have a look with this opt-out thing here. I mean, again, I disagree with the idea that private institutions should be engaging with the NHS. This is obviously bad, right? But, this isn't just like limited to what the NHS is doing. And again, like you've not told me what they're going to be using the data for. So, how do I know how bad it is unless I know the actual consequences of what's happening? Again, it's all about the rule book and not about the utility. Again, this is a part of what the big issue here is the ability with which the NHS is using private institutions with which to control access to your healthcare, or how your healthcare is accessed through these private institutions. If, for example, the Conservative government weren't engaging in a sell-off of NHS assets to private corporations, because welcome to how the Conservative Party functions, and further usage of contracts within the NHS infrastructure, they wouldn't need to sell on your information to these particular third parties. That's an issue with privatisation. Again, the big issue with what's happening here is that the private sector is getting involved with what should only be the realm of the public sector, which again would be a critique that Russell Brand should be making here, rather than making some big conspiracy, rather than just the allyship of private with the government, of the private sector with the government, which is what happens when you put fucking capitalists in charge.
Pretext of health measures, and we've got to do this, vaccine passports, all of that. They were selling, and then you had to actively opt out of it to not be included, but they didn't tell you that they were doing it. You didn't opt out of what? Nothing. I mean, they didn't tell us how we meant to opt out. We did a video about it, and so did a bunch of other people, and that slowed it down. But you know what they do? They boot it down the line, do it a bit later when no one's looking.
What article's this one? Fucking hell. At least...
about it, and so did a bunch of other people. And
Yeah,
that
true.
slowed-
Yeah, that's not specifically related to the World Economic Forum. That's just related to the ways in which the state apparatus of those who get lobbied by capital are then serve the interests of capital rather than the interests of the working class.
down. But you know what they do? They boot it down the line, do it a bit later when no one's looking. There's a war! There's a Joe Rogan! Right, put that stuff on. Additionally, the World Economic Forum...
Oh, of course he's talking about Joe Rogan. See, the podcaster grift in action.
provides a specific example of how digital IDs could be used to authenticate a user by using fingerprints, a password or identity verification technology, and decide whether they should be granted access to a bank loan by judging their profile, which may include their biometrics, name and national identity number, and history, which may include their credit, medical and online purchasing history.
You already get your access to loans restricted by your credit and medical history already. These are all things that you get restricted to credit in the first place because, people want to be able to specifically pin down who they're giving credit to those who either are definitely 100% going to pay it back, or those that just sit on the cusp so that they can then extract as much money as they can. People who don't default, but people they can extract further money because they can only just about afford to make the repayments, right? So that when any kind of default happens, they can use that to then make additional capital moving forward by increasing the rate at which, etc. That's why credit scores really exist, to hyper-focus and target those just on the cusp of affordability, so that they can then use late payments and additional consequences of failure to pay just on the cusp, so that they can then recoup that further by getting you trapped into a debt cycle. Whereas obviously what they don't want is people right at the far end who can never afford anything, who then take the money and run. That's explicitly why credit scores exist in the way that they do.
Maybe they're not evil. Maybe it's just they want things to be really neat and tidy, and human beings are not neat and tidy. We're varied and messy and peculiar and confusing, and government is control and requires order and metrics and data and information, and all this technology and these capacities must be incredibly attractive. But just as it is their duty to try and impose it, so it is ours to resist it, to oppose it, to...
But why are you talking about the government? This is the private sector. This is the private sector that is pushing for this. It's the private sector that's lobbying governments. It's the private sector that exists within the World Economic Forum. This is the talk about governments doing this. It's for the private sector that's engaging in this.
See, this push for an invasive digital ID system from the World Economic Forum follows it proposing other similar surveillance systems, such as turning your heartbeat into a digital ID. That's so ridiculous it can't be true. So let's watch the video of it actually happening. That's why it's nice, like, friendly music on it, innit? Like, it's a sort of a nice...
I'm just going to put the link to that video in the description. Just to reclaim the net video. Oh wow, Reclaim the Net comes up as red on Shinigami Eyes. I wonder why. Nope, just a bunch of links to his own content. He's not going to link to that World Economic Forum video, okay? Brilliant.
Your heartbeat is just as unique as your face, and we can smash both under the hammer of our tyranny. They should stop making these videos. I don't think they're having the desired effect. They seem to think that everyone's going to watch this and go, oh, this is brilliant. So lovely now. I can be identified by my heartbeat. Who's going to be identifying you? Hideous technocratic tyrants that will shut down your bank accounts if you don't agree with absolutely everything they say. Sit obediently bolt upright in your little chair and shut your mouth and do as you're told for the rest of your...
Right, so if they're interested in some level of control with which to try and manipulate their own ends, please tell me what their own ends are. Is it the accumulation of capital, Russell? It's strange how you don't mention this. How if everybody who was watching this could understand that this is the position that you get into when you have people who generate too much power, because these are the people who have all of the capital, the people who run the World Economic Forum, then you could people will be able to understand the issues with the system that's led to this in the first place, rather than just trying to create some phantom evil enemy that just exists because they're evil. That's the problem. And that, again, this is the big issue that I have with this content, and exactly what I was worrying about when I was starting off this segment in the beginning, in that the reason why the World Economic Forum exists and why they are bad is because of the ability of capital to try and replicate itself and to use its power and influence to protect its position at the top of the hierarchy.
Life. I mean, all this technology is potentially beautiful and incredible in the right hands, democratically understood, consensually used. Fantastic, wonderful, you geniuses, congratulations.
But the idea of capitalists is that it is consensually done so because that's how the market is played out. As if the market is completely uncoercive, which a bunch of fucking, capitalism stands believe that it is, when it just absolutely is not.
But under the auspices of what's been going on throughout the pandemic, the World Economic Forum has consistently advocated for vaccine passports and digital ID. Yeah, I bet they have. Beyond these specific proposals, the World Economic Forum is infamous for its agendas, such as the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which, according to Klaus Schwab, will lead to a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities. I don't think that human beings are capable of dealing with that. Unless human beings are able to live to some degree in a way that is reflective of our evolutionary history, i.e. tribal animals that have to work collegiately, then you're going to create dystopias, because you're not meant to centralise power to that degree, because the tools for it only recently have come into being, and we ain't caught up yet, and perhaps we never will and never should keep up. So I disagree very, very strongly with anything that leads to centralised global power, because you can see what happens in the event of these things occurring already. We've seen it in the last few years. Governments and private corporations.
Okay, so what things do you oppose that lead to the global centralisation of power? What are these things that you disagree with? Can you please elucidate on what it is that you disagree with, rather than just saying centralised power bad? Because I can tell you one of the things that's really bad that leads to global power being consolidated in very, very few hands, and that is the current economic system and incentive structures that lead to it, that lead on from it, right?
Increasingly embracing digital IDs. Some governments are also pushing a similar notion, social credit style apps that monitor citizens' behaviour and reward them for engaging in state-approved actions. I mean, bloody hell, you could almost look at the entire history of social media as heading to this point. Look,
I mean, by some governments, I think you mean China. You specifically mean China. Again, this wasn't a quote from the World Economic Forum, this is a quote from Reclaim the Net. Again, so he's including the editorialization, but he's not including, he's extrapolating from that, rather than coming back to the base principles from where it started from.
Bloody hell, you could almost look at the entire history of social media as heading to this point. Look how it was introduced in such a jocular manner. Hey, look, Facebook, you can flirt with people, you can catch up with your old school buddies. Why don't you tell us what you're thinking? Why don't you tell us what you'd like to buy? Why don't we control your every fucking move till you're in a fucking grave, and then we'll decide how many people can go to your funeral, or if you're even allowed a funeral or not. Mayors like New York City's Eric Adams intends to expand facial recognition as a way for the police to identify problems, follow up on leads, and collect evidence. You can see how these things in the right hand...
Yeah, but back the blue, am I right?
But again, what is the right hands for power of this nature and potential magnitude? You could go, no, because we were only... But look at what's going on in Canada. We're only just... It would get misused, wouldn't it? We already know how this ends. I've seen this film. I've already seen this film. You know, like, oh, we're just trying to prevent crime. I mean, that actually is Minority Report, isn't it? Amnesty International says that the city's main law enforcement agency already uses images, sometimes scraped from the internet, to compare and match with its own suspect and felon database, and then also those obtained from some 15,000 surveillance cameras installed all around New York. They're pretty well covered. NYPD's use of facial recognition...
Yes, or most police apparatuses will use this kind of stuff, will use facial recognition technology, because they're the fucking enemy. The police are the enemy. I interestingly find that they specifically focusing on New York, which is obviously a very kind of democratically run area, because they have to frame it in this issue that gets the right-wingers on side by trying to minimise it down to just Democrat areas being bad rather than the whole system being bad, right? This is the issue. This is why the police are class traitors. Let's be real.
Technology has been described as unscientific by Georgetown Law's Centre on Privacy and Technology, Jameson Spivak. This now goes so far that officers on occasion, when they cannot find a match with a security video image of a suspect, go ahead and try and match it with that of a lookalike celebrity. In one case, it was a photo of Woody Harrelson. How's that helping? Woody Harrelson ain't done anything. When the software turned up matches for the actor, the police identified and arrested one of the matches that they thought resembled the suspect from the security cam footage, writes Reason. Wait a minute! That looks a lot like Woody Harrelson. Well, I'm a Woody...
Right, so I'm going to have to fucking fact check this one as well. God, I hate these things. Wonder who Reason writes for. Free minds and free markets? Is this Russell Brand entirely using neoliberal sources for all of his critiques of things? I wonder how this is going to editorialise the ways in which he's trying to present this information to people who are watching this from a right-wing perspective. I wonder. This is so fucking... It's magical that this is the way in which it's happened. I wonder if this is going to be... This is being done in such a way to engender a certain audience who are not going to be receptive to an anti-capitalist critique. I wonder if he's particularly cultivating or grifting here. Again, and this is all being editorialized as though police are good, but bad people in control of the police are bad. But that's not the issue. The vast majority of police departments, across the world, are going to be using facial recognition software as it develops. It's not specific to the NYPD.
Halston lookalike. You're under arrest, sir.
Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got.
We're taking everything you got. So there you go then. Whether it's experience.
Exactly. Russ isn't. They're exactly pointing the finger at the wrong people, or he's pointing the fingers at people rather than systems.
Of working with people that go on to become political leaders, or the introduction of ideas that go on to be internationally accepted. It seems like the WEF, Klaus Schwab, Davos, do have some impact on reality. You look at those films, you see the stuff they make, you hear the stuff they say, you see the way it's being implemented. I know this will be labelled as conspiracy by some, and of course in a free world they're welcome to do that. But I'm only interested in stuff we can see and put together ourselves. Like, are those policies happening? You decide for yourself. Are bank accounts getting frozen anywhere? Are people being monitored? Is there surveillance? Is there data capture? Are there suggestions of global digital ID? You can decide that for yourself. Is this what you want? At the moment, you can decide for yourself, but a day may...
Exactly. No prescriptions at all from Russell. Just, here's a bunch of things that a neoliberal online news source said, right? Here's a bunch of things that some lolbertarians on my heavily editorialized website said is going to happen. You make up your own decision from my incredibly biased sources, rather than making my own actual prescriptive critiques of what's happening and why it's happening, right? God, I'm so fucking infantile. This guy's supposed to be a political pundit, and all he's doing is saying, well, Reclaim the Net said this, and Reason said this. You make up your own mind. You literally could have just tweeted out a link to these articles, and then said, woo, conspiracy. But maybe it's not a conspiracy, you decide for yourself, rather than underpinning the incentive structures that lead to these positions happening in the first place. God. Again, this is the issue with the influencerization of political discourse, is that it's all about generating clicks, it's all about cultivating an audience, it's all about having the ability to grow on the platform and having a sphere of influence, rather than talking about proper understandable critiques. I know that I'm engaging with it myself, but how else am I going to be able to actually engage in some kind of a level of systemic critique without appealing to the influence economy and the attention economy in the first place? So people watch this fucking video. But it's just incredibly frustrating. For someone who understood, who was reading Weber and reading Marx at the start, who had particular critiques of the way in which political economy uses mass media and centralizes power with which to agitate on behalf of capital, there are bits and pieces. Let me fucking bring up the Kavernacle video that he posted today, because it's really fucking good. You absolutely should go watch this Kavernacle video. Exactly, it's about selling fear. It's about, again, cultivating an audience, as I said before. Let me find this Kavernacle video. It's really good. Let me find the bit, what he was talking about.
Have you seen the news? I'm right wing now. Let's talk about how right wing.
Trans content and how he politically evolved on YouTube. Now, I did say in that video that was just part one, and a lot of the comments I was getting on that video were specifically talking about how he's become more like Joe Rogan or Jimmy Dore, despite the fact I didn't really talk about that in that video, because I was leaving it for this video because I just felt like it was way too much. That video is already nearly 50 minutes long. I don't know how long it's going to be, but we're going to try and maybe keep it under 50 minutes.
We're not going to watch the whole video. We're just going to watch this, where he elucidates on Russell Brand's previous comments about where he lies in the political spectrum. There we go. This is good. This is a good bit.
Language as much anymore, more like talk about this stuff without actually calling it like anti-capitalism. But it has a long history on his channel. Now, he has a video back in 2014, October 2014, the first year of his news show on YouTube, with a guy called Daniel Pinchbeck, who is someone who believes in shamanism and stuff. Also a guy who's had a lot of controversy I'm not going to talk about, but I think that's kind of relevant, because the point of this and the point of showing you this is that Russell is platforming someone who is talking about anti-capitalism, and as you'll see in the clip I'm going to show you, they talk about materialism, challenging corporations, and how to stop ecological disaster by essentially ending capitalism.
We have to be aware of the broader problem, because my understanding is if there were, what I sort of believe, perhaps naively, is if there was a philosophical change that led to economic change, i.e. that we confronted corporations, regulated their power and prevented their continuing tyranny, that in itself would make a difference on a broad global scale. But that, you're saying, won't be insufficient unless I also make an individual change, which is much harder because it involves more than just talking. Now, Buckminster Fuller, he said this thing: to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest time possible through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offence or the disadvantage of anyone. I really like that. It's like a haiku of what we need to do, because when I read that,
He speaks fucking quickly, doesn't he? Jesus.
it makes me realise, there's loads of systems that we have in place that are to the disadvantage of loads of people, that cause ecological offence simply because they make a lot of money for a few people, the 65 people that have as much wealth as the
incentive structure, yes, Russell. Funny how this critique isn't present in your current work.
the 50% of the people on the planet that are poorest.
People on the bus, in the gilded bus.
Terrible business.
Now, the stuff about capitalism causing climate change is something I fully believe in, but of course Russell was talking about it back in 2014. It's something he does talk about a fair bit on his channel even today. But going on through the timeline, in 2016 he had a video talking about why socialism is cool again, basically framing it in the I guess, the progressive wave of someone like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn being popular while not necessarily shying away from socialism. And in the video, he begins it by talking about capitalism and Marxism and where that kind of comes from, like the Protestant work ethic.
A pretty cod and simplistic analysis of capitalism, and the kind of capitalism that we have now is that it's really good at masking, disguising, and managing the problems that it creates. I don't know very much about Marxism, but what I do know is he predicted that it was cyclical, self-destructive, would lead to an elite benefiting at the expense of workers, primarily because it comes from an idea of individualism. Some fella called Max Weber says that capitalism isn't primarily an economic idea. He says it's a religious idea and comes from Protestantism, the idea that your personal striving here on this earth leads to being looked upon favourably by God. That capitalism was able to use that as a kind of jet fuel for that economic ideology, because you as an individual are responsible for yourself and your own relationship with God. The idea of community is diminished, and even the idea of family.
I've actually heard people say this a lot. It's something I need to do more research into, about how like the work ethic of Puritan Protestants and how they valued this stuff really played into the formation. I want to skip to, this is like an hour-long like podcast style interview, is at 14 minutes 15 seconds, where he talks about capitalism causing climate change essentially, and how Russell talks about how these things are often placed on the individual when it's systemic issues of capitalism.
Let me have a look at where he's talking about the relationship of the media. It was in the previous video, but there was a good video. There was a good clip that Cav showed in his videos that he did about Russell Brand, talking about the idea that the ways in which the media report on issues to reframe the problems of the incentive structures of capitalism are onto other people and onto individuals, right? The way it covers for capitalism through media manipulation. He covered that in the first video. Again, please watch Kavernacle's videos on Russell Brand. They're both very, very good. And go subscribe to his channel as well. He's also very good. I'll put the links in the description for you YouTube viewers. He's well worth watching, right? And he clearly shows here that Russell Brand understands the incentive structures. So, why is he not talking about this now? It's because his viewer base doesn't want to hear it. They just want to have their own... They're only watching this content so they can have their own biases reaffirmed by the content that they're watching. And so having a YouTube channel where you leave an open-ended question at the end there here where he said, well, I've just given the information, maybe you just go and decide for yourself. Well, they're going to decide based on their own existing previous bias. If you don't provide them with an alternative point of view, or with your own prescriptions, or with your own ideas about why things are happening, and not the idea that the things are happening, and just reporting on the existence of the thing rather than prescribing the root causes of such a thing. Right, you take care of yourself, Oscar. You sleep well, and thank you very much for joining the stream today. I do appreciate it. And unless you make those prescriptions, all that's going to happen is the people watching will then put their own prescriptions onto it and project their own biases and their own worldview onto the information that you're providing them with. And if you're cultivating an audience full of people who decided that the issues that are happening at the moment are all just a problem with bad people rather than bad systems, they're going to continually perpetuate that point of view they're having, where the issue is just Klaus Schwab and the evil cabal that is the World Economic Forum, and not the machinations of capital that led them to be in the positions that they are and to agitate for the things they're agitating for. Exactly, Limo. It just turns into a circle jerk. You're 100% correct. And that's why he's in the position that he's in, because he will be so open-ended with the critiques that he's making, or with the things that he's saying, so that anybody can just latch on and then apply their own ideas of why that's happening onto it, rather than him providing a point of view with which that they can contrast with their own worldview, which is what I'm trying to do here. Obviously, I'm an anti-capitalist, I am a communist. I do believe that the necessity of the profit motive will then lead to the oligopolies that has created the World Economic Forum, and that's why I believe that they are bad, right? Somebody could easily have watched someone who, unless I explicitly state this, someone with their own point of view could have watched this and then just said that the issue with the World Economic Forum is that they're bad, and by you defending them, you're just coping for them because you're in support of them. It's like, no. I absolutely agree that the World Economic Forum are bad, but they're bad because capitalism is bad, and they exist because of capitalism. You have to change the system, you have to change the incentive structures, you have to change the patterns of human behaviour that are incentivized by the system as it exists at the moment. Otherwise, there'll just be another World Economic Forum. That's what the Chamber of Commerce exists for. The Chamber of Commerce is just the unions, but for corporations, and that's why they exist. And unless you get rid of the incentive structures that lead to them in the first place, they're not going to go away. I'm going to keep saying incentive structures because that's what drives human behaviour. There's this fucking liberal delusion That everyone's this perfectly rational actor making perfectly rational decisions in their own self-interest or for the interest of the global community at large. When that doesn't happen, people are unfortunately idiots, myself included, just bumbling through society, interacting with incentive structures in the way that they want those structures want them to. I'm sorry, I understand you liberals really, really want to believe in your own personal agency, but it's just not as as powerful as you think it is, and your mind is going to be incredibly shaped by the material conditions that you live in. I know that's dirty Marxism to you, but the data has just borne that out over time by a historically materialist perspective of the way in which society has changed over time, and the way in which people's prescriptions have changed over time, and the way people's attitudes have changed over time. People are different people. They function differently under neoliberalism. The communitarian aspects of the social democratic consensus pre-Thatcher, pre-Reagan, that's disappeared, that's gone. People behave in different ways because of the way the system works. I watched my video on Kavernacle and the social contract, right? These are things that can only exist under a neoliberal me-first framework that didn't quite exist previously. These patterns of human behaviours are shaped by the system, not the other way around, right? And so that's why people want to be able to make individualist critiques, and again, that's also generally a fault of neoliberal ideology, insofar as because there's so much focus on the individual, people can only make critiques of the individual, and that's what people like me and Marxists like myself would want to counteract with our own ideological prescriptions about how things have and haven't changed. I've listed all the reasons why you should fuck toasters, but you decide for yourself. Exactly. That's what he's doing, and that's what he's propagandizing with. And I don't think he's doing it because he wants to make money. I just think he wants to be popular. And his general anti-establishment viewpoints that he's had for a very long time. And I agree with him from a left-wing perspective that the establishment is there because of capitalism, and he's clearly demonstrated it in the far more intellectually superior segments that Kavernacle showed in that little segment that I just played. He's clearly being far more intellectually honest and rigorous in those segments that he's talking about there, rather than when in the actual segment that we just watched, where he's just taking in an article online, reading it to you and saying, is it a conspiracy? You decide for yourself, right? What else are they going to come away thinking about it? Like, you've presented these arguments in such a way. Please make a prescription. Otherwise, people, as I said, will just watch it and then get self-aggrandizement from using it to then supplement their own worldview, right? It's not, and I have no issue with people watching content that they want to watch because it helps be able to solidify their own ideology. Right? I don't really have an issue with that. I do that a lot of the time as well. I watch videos about Marxist theory and Marxist analysis, right? I read Marx, I read Gramsci, I read all of these Marxist philosophers, all these Marxist economists, right? I want to understand more these kind of things. But at least I'm doing that from an analytical perspective to try and broaden my own knowledge, rather than finding puff pieces that I can then map onto my own prescriptions about the world, which doesn't make my knowledge any greater. That's the big difference that's happening here. I mean, I'll definitely watch things that I disagree with, right? I've just watched a bunch of stuff that I disagree with. I've watched plenty of Jordan Peterson to be able to understand what he believes and why he believes is incorrect. And I've not had my mind changed by watching a bunch of Jordan Peterson. Because he is making prescriptive arguments. He is taking his own personal philosophy and then using that to try and explain what he thinks is wrong and how to fix it. Which is at least far more intellectually honest than what Russell Brand's engaging in by just not having any prescriptions at all. And that's why that's why grifters like him and why the social media space is dangerous. Because again, what is it? It's an incentive structure which incentivizes being able to engage within the market of attention, the attention economy, where all you need to do is get views, get clicks to get popular, and that satisfies the structure of the incentive structure that is built within the social media space to try and become popular, to be an influencer. And if what the market demands is to be able to satisfy an audience of idiots who want to be able to watch a video on the World Economic Forum to satisfy their own understandings of this global conspiracy of evil people like the fucking, like the Legion of Doom, to be able to understand the ills of the world, then they're going to go and watch that, and people are going to create content that panders to that viewpoint. Obviously, there's a market for left-wing critiques as well, which, again, if you look at people who have not exactly particularly intellectually high-level content, people like Xander Hall or Hassan or whatever, then people are going to want to watch that content as well. Like, Hassan is popular, but at least he says he's an idiot, and he makes some prescriptions right, and he's at least in some way intellectually honest in the way that he structures his arguments. He doesn't just play something to you and then go, well, you make up your own opinion, right? He does at least have some intellectual critique behind the things that he watches, which is something you don't get from Tim Pool, that you don't get from Russell Brand. I mean, Tim Pool is even worse, because he will actually just physically say, it could be this way or it could be this way. There's a great video by Tim Brand's host called Tim Pool Fences that you should watch, but the way in which the social media ecosystem works is to incentivize this behavior. And so you have to understand that's why Russell Howard does what he does. Russell Brand. I keep saying Russell Howard. That's why Russell Brand does what he does, to engender because he is engendered by the YouTube, the way the YouTube algorithm works and where YouTube is structured, because that's what's going to get him clicks, want to get him views, want to make him popular, is just by parroting the existing views of the people who want to have that self-aggrandized by watching it on YouTube. But if he's going to do that, he needs to do that in an intellectually honest way, which he's not doing. He's just essentially being a propagandist, which is frustrating, considering that the things that he is criticizing, he could critique from his own admitted left-wing perspective. He calls himself left-wing. He believes in a bunch of things like a social safety net. He believes in the issues of capitalism as structure. He believes in, rights for minorities and things like this, like kind of the liberal left perspective. But doesn't come through in any of his content, because that wouldn't get him clicks. It's as simple as that. So with that in mind, exactly, it's faux populism spewed by Tucker Carlson. It's the exact same kind of thing, right? Or by Jimmy Dore, or by fucking Crystal Ball and Saga and Jetty, right? It's this same fucking griftathon, like, revolving door of online right-wing, populist in inverted commas YouTube content that you're getting nowadays. But at least people like Crystal Ball, who is a socialist, are doing so with some kind of critique in mind, rather than just using it to be able to gain clicks and feed the audience their own viewpoints back at them without embellishing further. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please do consider liking and subscribing. That does always help in the algorithm. If you click the bell, that will notify you whenever I release a new video, and will also notify you when I do go live. And if you would like to check out the description for this video, it will have all my social media links, so you can follow me on Twitter, on Twitch, on Instagram, and on TikTok to be able to keep in touch with anything that I'm posting on there. And if you want to check out my profile, you can watch some more videos too. I'll see you next time.